Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Gunatu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are continuing the lecture by, I always forget this, Swami Sardananda, called The Goal and the Way. We're about halfway through that one, and we will probably finish that one. We might even start a new one tonight. So let's see how far we get. I was going to start with the paragraph that says, I have already told you.
I've already told you that there are 4 paths to religion. If we analyze them, if we find that they lead men to the same goal, the Vedas, Puranas, Tantras teach us that the goal is one, but there are various ways. The famous Mahinam Stotra says, O Lord, although there are so many philosophies such as the Vedas, Sankhya, Yoga, Shaiva, Vaishnava, and so on, there are but different ways to thee. Thou art the destination of all that travel according to their tastes by paths straight or crooked. Ramakrishna used to say that there are various ways to Kaligat, so each of the philosophies is but a way to the Lord. In the scriptures, we find different doctrines and practices inculcated to suit people of varied inclinations. Therefore, different philosophies, although they appear as contradictory to one another, are in fact not so, for the goal is the same.
You know, here we are in Hollywood, and if somebody wants to go to Santa Monica, GPS might say, take the 101 north to the 405 south, and so forth. Or it might say, take the 101 south and the 110 south and the 10 west. Or it might say, take Sunset Boulevard. So Sunset Boulevard might just seem like completely out of the blue, and the other two seem contradictory. But you can get to Santa Monica by all those ways. So similarly, we find sometimes things in different religions might seem like very, very different, and yet somehow they all get you there. For example, some religions say you should shave all your hair off, and others say you should never cut your hair. And it's completely opposite instruction. Well, they're just ways of remembering God, basically. And so by hook or by crook, we figure out different ways to keep our mind on God. And that's really the basis of spiritual practice, not any particular set of instructions. All right.
Spiritual practice means the struggle to realize those states and experiences which the great sages had when they saw the vision of truth or to become like them. The Gita depicts the characteristics of perfected souls. When a man puts away all the desires of his mind, O Arjuna, and when his self finds comfort in self, then is he called a man of steady wisdom. As we breathe freely, so do these men forsake lust and gold without any effort. Their body and senses are so constituted as not to lead them astray. We not dwell much upon the characteristics of men of realization or about their realizations, since we are far from the goal. The crying need with us is to know all the various means to God realization and to select one from among them and build our life accordingly.
Of course, that's a reference to the section of the second chapter of the Gita called the Stita Prajna, which describes a man of steady wisdom. When Arjuna asks Krishna, a man of an enlightened person, how does he walk? How does he talk? And how does he do all the normal things in life? And so Krishna goes through a whole litany of characteristics. And of course, even those might differ from one holy person to another. So even that kind of instruction might vary from one to the other, again, according to circumstances, times, the particular time in history, and so forth. All right, let's read the next paragraph.
Formerly, scriptural truths were kept away from the masses. This no doubt preserved the priestly supremacy intact, but the national life degraded for want of learning. The priests, however, justified their conduct by saying the truths, when imparted to unfit persons, were often misunderstood and resulted in grave consequences, as, for instance, Vedanta, which, when misunderstood, often makes atheists of men, thereby making them more attached to things of the world. In reply, it might be said, if you cannot find out the right aspirants, give everybody the opportunity of reading and thinking over the truths. Then each man will choose his own path. Nowadays, all the scriptures are being printed, so it's useless to hide them.
Of course, the West went under certain similar circumstances. In the West, only the priests were taught to read and write very much, and so they were the only ones that could read the Bible. And of course, before Gutenberg invented the printing press, everything was a hand manuscript, and there weren't a whole lot of those around. So they were rare volumes, and only the privileged few had them, and so you just had to hear them from somebody else. So that's also why they put a lot of stained glass windows and frescoes in the churches and the cathedrals, because they wanted to tell the story of Jesus in pictures so that everybody could remember the stories without having to read them, because they couldn't read them. Probably because they couldn't read and they didn't have anything to read in the first place. So a similar situation where the scriptures themselves were being hidden from the masses. And of course, it was quite a revolution when the masses were able to then start to read for themselves and find out what the Bible said. And so we have the same situation in India, rather than just the Brahmins taking the scriptures for themselves. And of course, they had to preserve them by memory. The same problem, no printing press. So what do? You divvy up the scriptures among the various families of the Brahmin class, and assign each one to memorize certain scriptures, and then they pass that on from generation to generation. And so huge emphasis on precise pronunciation. You don't want any sloppy pronunciation where you might suddenly have another word creeping in instead of the original word. And so that was another thing that they would say, well, you don't want people reciting the scriptures that aren't pronouncing it exactly right. Who knows what they'll be saying, and if you don't say it correctly, it won't have the right effect, and that sort of thing. So that kind of attitude is still prevalent among some people in the Brahmin class, that you will find that everything has to be in Sanskrit and it has to be absolutely perfectly pronounced and so forth. I remember when we were taking our vows in India, Swami Vandhanananda said, "Oh, don't, some of us weren't all that great at Sanskrit." He says, "Don't worry. Sri Ramakrishna is a very forgiving God, and it won't matter if you don't pronounce everything absolutely perfectly." So we have a new dispensation. And I remember at a conference, I think it was in 1993, in celebration of the 100 years after the Columbian Exposition and the Parliament of Religions, there was a conference, and one of the swamis said, we should teach everybody Sanskrit so they can read the scriptures in the original. And another swami got up and said, Why should they read it? Or what did he say? Now we have the original in English, so they don't need to read Sanskrit. We have Swami Vivekananda issuing the scriptures all in English and all the lectures that he gave. So those were some interesting perspectives. So if some of you out there don't know Sanskrit, you see, you're okay. All right, let's go on.
Now let us see, following what main disciplines the four kinds of aspirants, namely the jnani, the bhakta, the yogi, and the karmi, reach ultimately the same goal. The jnani discriminates between the real and the unreal, and renouncing the desire for unreal objects, seeks the real in his own self. That he declares as the true self. His aim is to destroy the little self of desires, which is limited by body and mind, and to become the higher self. The jnani practice consists in discrimination through the process of not this, and meditation on the true nature of the self. The jnani says, give up at once what you find to be unreal after due discrimination. You will see on examination that body, mind are not real, and that if you can get rid of your thoughts about and attachment for them, you will realize the eternal self and remain in it. Once you get established in the self, you find that the absolute and the relative are inseparably connected, as the sun and its rays. Therefore, the jnani says, all that we see in the universe is the manifestation of the self, and the self alone. And I am that self. To bear it in mind always is the main effort of the jnani.
Yeah, this is, we hear this so often, that you discriminate between the real and the unreal, and yet then we also hear that Shankar said, well, it's not really unreal, it's simply some sort of weird mixture of real and unreal, or something that's inscrutable that you can't really categorize. And then we also hear this thing where we've discriminated between what they're calling the real and the unreal, and then when you finally get to the realization, you realize that it's all really one in the first place. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, of course, Ramakrishna was as much of a Shakta Vedanta or a Tantric Vedanta as he is a Shankara Vedantan. And in that path, we have this idea that Brahman and Shakti are one. So if you look at that oneness as Brahman and work down from there, then you get the jnani path that's real or just temporarily real, so kind of unreal. But if you take the Shakta path, then everything is imbued with power. It's imbued with consciousness. And so in that approach, everything you see, you have to realize that it's really the Divine Mother in disguise. It's in there, but you just don't remember, or you don't see it quite correctly. And so you can use everything to remind you of the divine. Somewhat of a different path. We're coming into the Durga Puja season here. That'll be starting in about 10 days. And one of the hymns in the Chandi is the famous Ya Devi hymn that goes through a litany of 19 different qualities of the Divine Mother. Salutations to the Mother who embodies consciousness and thirst and hunger and shadow and modesty and learning and all. Sleep, yeah, sleep. Okay, I can't remember all 19 off the top of my head, but anyway, so far from memory is in there too. So, when you can use those, you see, to remember that the divine is hiding in all of these things. When you feel sleepy or when you feel hungry or when you feel thirsty, that's the power or energy of the divine consciousness of Shakti working through you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that. It wouldn't be there. When you see something beautiful, and pleasing. It's the divine showing through. If you see something that's terrifying, that's the divine showing through. And error is also there. That's the last one in the litany. And error simply reminds us that we don't remember it. We make mistakes. We forget that this is all the same. It's like looking at all sorts of jewelry and thinking that some of it is actually fake gold and fake diamonds, when it's really all real gold and real diamonds. So we don't remember that it's all really coming from that one source. So that's just a different approach, and it's not usually kind of worked into the 4 yogas as much, so I thought I'd mention it. Okay.
The yogi says that man becomes subject to a good many samskaras, latent tendencies, by identifying himself with sense objects from birth to birth. This is the reason why he suffers so much and finds it very difficult to get free from them. The yogi suggests a means. Sit still. Do not indulge in any thought, forgetting yourself. Allow the mind to think. You begin to watch calmly its various workings as a witness. Then concentrate your mind on an object. This concentration will burn the seeds of samskaras and reveal the truth. Right concentration will bring in self-realization. Therefore, we see that the chief effort of the yogi is to think himself as a witness under all circumstances and to concentrate the mind fully on a single object.
You know, somebody asked us why the Swamis have such long names. I suppose we could say that it's because by the time you finish pronouncing it, you've forgotten who you are at the beginning. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to forget this little self and try to keep our mind concentrated on usually the mantra or the chosen ideal or something positive of that nature, so that our mind is stilled. Sometimes I compare it to a swimming pool. Now, if you've got people jumping in and out of the swimming pool, and you've got something at the bottom of the swimming pool, maybe you've lost something and it's down at the bottom of the swimming pool, you're going to have to tell everybody, stop jumping in and out of the swimming pool. I can't see it, and I don't know where it is, and I need to go get it. So you have everybody stop, okay, and then you can go get it because all the waves have stilled down and you can dive deep. Now, that's from the mental standpoint. We're going to use another analogy now. That's not always easy to do, to tell the monkey mind to stop jumping. It wants to jump from one thing to the other. It thinks about the things you did, thinks about the things you wish you'd done, thinks about the things you need to do, thinks about all sorts of stuff. And so it's jumping around. How do you still it? Not that easy. So the trick is take one thought and try to focus it on that. And that's sort of like if you took a stick and dipped it into the swimming pool and just created one nice uniform pattern of circular waves, you could probably still see the bottom pretty well. So we still the mind by almost stilling it with one thought. All right.
The Bhakta says, completely surrender yourself at the feet of the Lord and establish a particular relationship with him. The relationship may be that of a father, mother, friend, master, husband, and so forth. According to your liking, you may choose one of them. Give all unto him, your body, mind, wife, children, and everything that you have. A question may arise. How do you form a relationship with one whom we do not see? Well, you love somebody very dearly. Take him to be your God for the time being. Then gradually you may be able to have that relationship with the Lord.
And of course, sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we need to serve a particular loved ones. Suppose if you're a parent, you have children and you have to serve them, or the husband and the wife need to serve each other, or perhaps some friend is in need and you have to serve them. So we can take these temporary relationships and realize that the Lord has given us this opportunity to serve Him through this particular person. So really, Hinduism is the easiest religion, really, in some way, because it gives you so many options. It doesn't, suppose you had a difficult father, and then somebody tells you, well, think of God as your father. Well, that's not going to be the most pleasant experience, to think of God as your father, if you didn't have a good relationship with your father in the first place. So it's better to be able to choose a relationship that you see with the divine. And of course, it can be a feminine aspect too. This is all done in the masculine, in the ancient language of 100 years ago. But of course, it could easily be a feminine aspect of God. All right.
A lady once put this question to Sri Ramakrishna: I cannot steady my mind. The thought of my nephew always haunts it. Ramakrishna replied, well, take your nephew to be the Lord and serve him with this consciousness. By following the advice for some time, the lady attained to a superconscious state. You cannot make God your own and love him so long as you cannot establish some relationship with him. Prabhupada used to sing, he is an object of love. Without having love, through abstract thoughts alone, we cannot realize him. When love for him arises, he draws us like a magnet, attracting iron filings. If you completely surrender yourself to him, become his absolutely, your little self, full of selfishness, will vanish, and the true self will appear at once.
People that fall in love find that they get all consumed. They think about the person all the time. And so the idea is you want to use that energy for your spiritual practice and not just use it for some personal relationship. In fact, the personal relationships half the time or more end up not working out, and then you have trouble detaching. So it's kind of a waste of time in some sense to put all that energy into a relationship with a person in the world when it's could end in disaster. So put it to the Lord instead. Channel the energy. You see, you take your natural tendencies or energies and turn them towards God. And you have choices in Hinduism. You've got these 4 yogas that we're going through. And sometimes I think of it, I don't know how many people play bridge anymore, but bridge is a game where they deal out the whole deck of 52 cards, so everybody has 13 cards. And so the average group of 13 cards is going to have, let's see, 3, and 4 of each suit. So you'd have 3 of one suit, 3 of another suit, 3 of another suit, and then 4 of the last suit. So pretty equal, but you can't have an equal number of each suit because you've got 13 cards. And so one suit is always going to be slightly dominant, but you could have a different number. You could have 5 in one suit, 5 in another suit, 2 in one suit, and 1 in one suit. Or you could be completely void in one suit. So our tendencies are like that. We might find that one of these yogas just doesn't suit us at all, and that one of them tends to predominate. But in the end, we're going to try to blend them all together anyway, but you're going to end up using your strongest ones and trying to blend those. But each person's going to be a little bit different, okay?
The Kari says, work for the sake of the Lord and give all fruits to him. Never work for selfish purposes. Selfishness is death. Always work, but never be attached to the fruits thereof. Do work as worship, and never work for name, fame, and money. Make work as service to the Lord. He's playing in various ways in the world. Think yourself blessed if you can do a little service to him. It's unnecessary to say that if you work like this, your selfishness will gradually be destroyed and the real self will be manifested.
Right. I often, when I'm talking to world religions classes or something, I tell them that karma yoga tells us to focus on the service of your customer rather than focusing on your bottom line and figuring out how you can eke out as much profit margin as you can. If you put your emphasis on how you can best serve the customer, then your customers are going to come back and you're going to do more business. So rather than distracting your mind with worrying about the profit margin, you need to worry about serving the customers so that they come back. All right.
The above 4 kinds of spiritual practices are means for these 4 classes of men. But the aim is the same, to kill the lower self. Think deeply, and we'll find there's hardly any difference among them. In fact, there is none. Kill the little self, and you will be free. Ramakrishna used to say, when shall I be free? When I ceases to be. The soul in bondage is jiva. When free, it is Shiva. When the eye of ignorance departs, man becomes God and attains freedom. Ramakrishna used to say, as water is called variously, so is God.
Right, that's the bottom line of all these yogas, is to somehow decrease the stranglehold of the ego, which tends to come from our sense organs. Our sense organs go out and entertain the mind with all sorts of things and create a separateness between us and everything else. In fact, there's a very specific part of the brain that is responsible for creating that sense of self that's separate from the universe. And they found that when people are meditating, and it didn't happen in just one tradition, but in different traditions of meditators, that area of the brain tends to calm down, and that's why they feel an expansion of consciousness and a feeling of oneness. So all of these yogas are designed to do that. So in Bhakti Yoga, you're turning everything over to the Lord. You're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the Lord. In Karma Yoga, you're detaching yourself from the results. So your ego can't have the fun or the displeasure of either feeling good about it or bad about it. And in meditation, you're simply trying to calm the waves of the mind so that you're not thinking about these things. You're closing off your sense organs so that those ideas and thoughts aren't raging in. And did I leave one out? Yeah. Oh, the Jnana, yes. Okay. So in the Jnana Yoga, you're affirming your true self, and so the temporary self is the ego's self, and so you're trying to affirm your true self. All right, let's go on.
These are the main things about spiritual practice. They are very essential in building life and in reaching the goal. First, make your thoughts consistent with your words. Then take up any path you like. Try seriously to build your life from this very day. The Lord himself will give you whatever else is required. Relinquishing all duties, take refuge in me alone. Do not grieve. I will deliver thee from all sins. If you sincerely take refuge in him, there can be no sin or weakness anymore. He alone can save us from all evil. Let this be our prayer to God, that from today we all can believe that by the power of his name, we are free forever from all weaknesses and sins.
Yeah, and we can always look to the examples of the direct disciples, Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and the direct disciples, as exemplars of how to live in the world. Because even though we might think of them as not being in the world, Ramakrishna was kind of like that, but he did hold down a job as the priest at the Kali temple. So he wasn't completely out of the world. And Holy Mother had all sorts of duties. She had to take care of a crazy niece, and she was very good to a lot of her relatives and to the people in her village. Did a lot of the cooking and cleaning. Cooked for Sri Ramakrishna when she was at the temple. So she had a lot of household duties. She wasn't just sitting doing nothing. And take the example of Swami Saradananda, who was the secretary of the whole Ramakrishna Mountain mission. Huge responsibilities on his shoulders. Or Swami Koko Maharaj, who was the treasurer and had to handle all the money. Now, if you take the example of Ramakrishna, you think you're not supposed to touch money, but somebody had to touch money, and one of the direct disciples was the treasurer and handled all those financial things for the order. So each of them did various things. Akhandananda did a lot of service work, very difficult service work. And so Vijnanananda was an engineer and did the designs for the temple at Bellarmont. So these people aren't just sitting in meditation all day. They're working at various jobs and duties and incorporating their spiritual practices along with those. All right, well, we're going to continue now with the one on Karma Yoga. If you're reading in the book, it's at 103. And did you tell me it was Turiyananda?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
All right, this is by Swami Turiyananda. I don't know why they don't put the author in with the text. You have to go back to the table of contents to find out who wrote it. All right.
Sri Krishna teaches in the Gita karma yoga for the desirous. What kind of karma is it? We want to know how those who are desirous can perform work without attachment. Of course, their actions are prompted by desires, but that does not by itself make their actions tainted. If those actions are prohibited by the scriptures, if they are sinful, then alone are they blameworthy. Those whose minds are attached to enjoyment cannot but perform actions prompted by desires for the satisfaction of those desires. If they are asked to perform work without any motive, they cannot understand that teaching at all. That is why the scriptures have prescribed for them actions with desires. The Gita does not teach merely work without attachment, but also work for the fulfillment of desires. Prajapati, having in the beginning created mankind together with Yajna, says, "By this shall you multiply. This shall be the milk cow of your desires." Scriptures hold out different ideals to different people according to their capacity. Each selects according to his own fitness. One from out of these teachings adheres to it with shraddha and attains prosperity. That is why the Lord says, "Devoted each to his own duty, man attains the highest perfection." One has to perform the duty for which one is fit, and thus increase the sattva in him. That is the teaching of the scriptures. He who has strong desires must be given some scope for enjoyment. You cannot, by mere instruction, forcibly turn his mind away from enjoyment. But then there should be enjoyment with discrimination, for there can never be satisfaction of desires by enjoyment. It goes on ever increasing like fire into which ghee is poured. That is why enjoyment should be regulated by discrimination. Then only will there be any chance of one's realizing the situation, as was the case with King Yayati. Work without attachment should be the aim, the goal, but it cannot be realized by mere talk. In fact, there can be nothing like work without attachment, for without illumination, one cannot be truly free from attachment. Work without attachment before realization is work done for realizing the Lord. Work done for realizing the Lord is no work.
Of course, all of these are ideals that we're working toward, so that you work toward them by trying to incorporate these various ideas. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of exception here. Sometimes, if you fulfill desires, you just get over them, or you just become satiated, or you realize, well, there's not much in them. And so sometimes, by fulfilling your desires, it doesn't just go on increasing, but you become satiated, and you think, well, that was kind of boring. After it's not much in it that I thought there wasn't as much in there as I thought there was, or you just become tired of it. I mean, how many people like to do the same things they did 30 years ago, or when you were a little kid? Just because you enjoyed something when you were a little kid doesn't mean you enjoy doing it now. And some people work at a particular occupation for maybe 15 years and then think, okay, I'd like to go on and do something else. I'm tired of this. So they move on. So sometimes we can find that fulfillment of desires can lead to satisfaction in the sense that you get over it. You realize that it doesn't have the great fulfillment you thought it had, and you can move on. And eventually, once you've done that enough, you realize, well, all of these worldly things don't really seem to add up to much, and you realize that you need to focus on desiring God rather than these other things. A second point is that if you find yourself with an inclination to want to do something particular, find a way of turning it towards the Lord, turning it towards God, or turning it into a spiritual practice. So if you enjoy physical fitness, well, maybe you can become a yoga instructor. If you enjoy writing music, well, write music that has spiritual lyrics to it. If you enjoy art, well, draw paintings that have spiritual themes in them. If you enjoy writing, well, write dramas that have to do with spiritual things. So various things that you might think are extraneous, you can figure out a way to incorporate them into your spiritual practice rather than just trying to deny something that's an innate tendency. You can think, well, maybe the Lord put this tendency in me because he or she, depending on your perspective, wants me to do something along that line in order for service. Or perhaps it's, you want to serve people in a particular capacity. You want to help the homeless, or you want to serve in an underprivileged country or something of that nature. Then you just feel that that's the way you're going to serve the Lord, through that tendency. So you use your tendencies and turn them towards the Lord. You can kind of think of that as the martial arts of spiritual practice. If you've ever studied a martial art, many of them incorporate ways of taking the opponent's energy and turning it to your advantage. So that's what we do with spiritual practices. You take what might be an egoistic desire, and you turn it around and turn it into a spiritual practice. So if you think of the ego as sort of being the enemy of your spiritual life, then you've used the energy of the ego and turned it around and made it your friend. All right, we've got time for another paragraph or two.
The desire for devotion is no desire, namely no cause of bondage. Thus, if work is done for his sake, it is said to be done without attachment. Otherwise, strictly speaking, the jnanis, enlightened ones alone, can perform work without attachment. For due to knowledge, all their desires are burnt down. Except the jnanis, none else has the power to do work without attachment. But then work done with the desire of attaining knowledge can still be called work without attachment. It's difficult to understand the true nature of work. That's why the Lord says, The nature of work is impenetrable. Even sages are bewildered as to what are action and inaction. Bhagavad Gita.
Now, of course, when you think about it, you can't, just by doing good work to counteract bad samskaras, you can't really get out of this, because anything you do is going to have a mixture of good and bad. So you try to do the things that have the most good and the least bad, but it's almost impossible to do something that's purely good. I think it probably is impossible. In the realm of Maya, I think it's probably fair to say any action is going to be slightly tainted, because that's simply the nature of Maya. I used to be a school teacher, and you have to do the best you can to reach as many of those students as you can. But there's going to be at least a couple of those students that just don't like your teaching style. And there's not much you can do about it. You try to adjust to reach as many of them as you can, and to do as good a job as you can for as many of them as you can. But there's probably going to be at least a couple that just aren't happy in your classroom. So no matter what you do, you're going to be causing some problem. If you're gardening, you have to pull out the weeds and kill the bugs that are eating your plants. So for the standpoint of the weed and the bugs, it feels like you're not doing them much of a favor. So no matter what you do, there's going to be some taint in it. And these days, we're all trying to be energy conscious. We're trying to use things that are more efficient and use more electricity rather than fossil fuels. But we find that when we analyze it, there's always an ecological consequence to almost anything we do. If you build a dam, you've probably wiped out several villages in the process, and hundreds of acres of a particular ecosystem. If you use solar power, then you're covering, say, the desert or something with miles of solar panels, which also disrupts the desert animals. If you use some other source of fuel, how are you going to create the electricity? Are you going to use something? You're going to use hydrogen to generate the electricity? Well, how'd you generate the hydrogen? Well, you've got to use energy to generate the hydrogen. So then how are you going to store it at night? Are you going to use lithium batteries? Well, then you have to factor in the mining consequences. You got to mine the lithium and the other components of the batteries. And after 10 years, they're defunct, and you've got to find a place to put them. It's like nuclear energy. We thought that was a great solution. And then you're faced with the problem of what do you do with the waste for 200,000 years. So it seems like everything in Maya has, it's like the dog's curly tail. You do the best you can, but it keeps curling back up. So that's the kind of dilemma that we find with karma. And so you can't completely get out of this just by doing action. Well, the next paragraph goes on for a long time. We've only have 1 minute left. So I think we'll close here, and we'll pick this up next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.